Delighted on this episode of Words, Images, and Worlds to be talking with rather prolific and I'll say also rather transmedia author, Paul Cornell. Paul, welcome. Thank you for
Oh,
joining.
well, thank you very much for having me along.
Absolutely. Readers out there will know you for your work in the world of Doctor Who. You've written for film, television, as well as comics. You have your own prose work as well. So very storied and very varied. And on this episode, we're talking about a sort of academic approach that you're taking with the Mighty Avengers versus the 1970s. So very curious to hear about this project.
Well, absolutely. This is a book I've been wanting to write for years. And I always thought, I will eventually approach an academic company. But then I was approached by Bloomsbury, who asked me if I wanted to contribute to their new Marvel line and, what I might pitch. So I pitched the thing I'd always wanted to pitch, which
Hmm.
was this, which is basically about the Avengers, just the single title, just across the decade of the 1970s. And it's both a critical approach in that I don't think this gets done enough. I talk about what makes superhero comics work
Hmm.
and how well this particular 10 years run achieves its aims. So I'm taking superhero comics by their own aims, by what they are setting out to do. And along the way, we talk about how the Avengers addresses the socio-political themes across that enormous decade. Um, and also we examine the styles and the individual approaches of the three and a bit major Avengers writers across that decade. Roy Thomas, Steve Englehart, Jim Shooter, and the bunch of writers put together by editor Roger Stern, which eventually became the David Michelinie run slightly after the end of the decade.
Hmm.
And yeah, the approaches vary enormously, and you can see superhero comics moving on very
Hmm.
swiftly across that decade. And we track things like how much heroes talk to themselves out loud
Hmm.
versus the thought balloon. And that changes entirely across the 10 years. And uh, also just how much each writer wants to engage with social causes, and that
Hmm.
varies enormously too. And so yeah, it's also it's a beautiful little book in that it's fully illustrated in color as well. So I get to actually say, and here, have a look at this page. Here it is,
Love that. Hmm.
which feels like a great luxury.
Yeah. Oh, what was your introduction to Marvel and to the Avengers team?
Well, when I was very young, my father brought home issue one of the British Avengers Weekly in black and white, which
Hmm.
had issue four of the Avengers, them finding Captain America in the front, and some scary Steve Ditko Doctor Strange in the back.
Hmm.
And I thought it was the most grown-up thing I had ever seen. There had previously been, I was vaguely aware of, other British Marvel reprint titles. But I think because my dad had been a soldier in World War II, and because this had Captain America front and center, who was a soldier revived from World War II, that kind of felt like a way in for me. And of course,
Hmm.
Stanley starts talking straight to you, the reader, immediately, and that pulls you in that wonderful way of Stan's. And yeah, so I was hooked from that point. And then, and this is the thing that really did it, I found a couple of years later on a newsstand an import American issue from the Avengers Defenders War.
Hmm.
And I was like comparing that to the run of Avengers I'd followed in the British Weekly, and I was like,
Right.
this we're on video, so I guess I can do
Uh-huh.
do things in expression, but no, I was like, this makes no huge changes must have happened. That guy on the masthead, the Vision, he seems to be very important. If he's on the masthead, he wasn't there at all when I was reading it, and
Mhm.
um, and there was enough familiar in the team that made me think, well, yes, this is still obviously the same team. But Hawkeye's fighting them on the other side, and
Yeah.
uh, and it's that lovely Hitchcock zoom pull back moment when you think, "Wow, this is an enormous universe. I must find out every detail of what happened in between."
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
the Avengers, to me, as I say in the introduction, always felt like an enormous luxury. My childhood was pretty bad, and I tended to deny myself things that were very good because they were too good for me. But the Avengers was a book that felt like one was getting the best of everything. And that first issue of the Avengers Defenders War I read with Captain America versus Iron Man and no, what am I talking about? Um, Captain America versus the Submariner and the Swordsman versus the Valkyrie. It still seems to me to be a platonically perfect superhero comic. The art in particular, by the very undervalued artist, which I go into some detail about in the book, um, uh, has a balance of shape and form, which I still find delightful. And yeah, it's impossible for me to be objective about
Hmm.
that issue. I realize that it's just high romance for me, and but I then it took me years before I read the rest of the Avengers Defenders War because you found things on newsstands incredibly randomly, and
Hmm.
so yeah, that was my introduction to it.
Love it, love it. You've also written for Marvel. You've written various titles, including Captain Britain. I'm curious what it's like to go from sort of the reader side, the academic side, to the crafting the stories, contributing to the universe. What is that like for you?
Well, I was um, one of the things I was determined to do in this book was to be not just fair but kind to all the creators involved. Um, we're largely talking about creative decisions these people made in their 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And little, if there's a conflict, and one chapter is largely about a conflict between two creators, Jerry Conway and Steve Englehart. Um, you know, they're both people I really admire, and
Hmm.
a lot of us don't have our finest hours when arguing with another 20-something man in a work situation, and the idea that fans are taking sides over it still all these decades later, I find very ugly. And so I tried to be nice to everybody, um, without ignoring, anything that needed commenting on. I think
Hmm.
it's a very even-handed book. But as a creator myself, and I would hope future critics would extend me the same courtesy, um, I was, I think, a little too concerned about continuity. I was always well, let's make sure that we've continued from the last person's run rather than overwriting it.
Hmm.
And um and I did ridiculous things like Chris Claremont had left a chap called Captain Fate in a perilous situation and never rescued him, a kind of pirate. And I rescued him just because I thought, well, it's dangling, isn't it? It's annoyingly dangling.
Someone else out there, I'm sure, was thinking that too. Like, whatever happened to that guy? Is he still out there? So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the kind of thing I did far too much. But yeah, so I'm very proud of some of my things at Marvel. Young Avengers has just come out in an epic collection, and
Mhm.
I'm delighted that's out there. I have a little speech by Kate Bishop on how meaningless and useless the Punisher is, which I'm very proud of.
Mhm.
And uh, yeah, and there are bits of my Wolverine run I really like. And Captain Britain, I had a thoroughly good time, and I hope the audience did too. Actually, I get of all my Marvel books, that's the one people come up to me and talk to me about most. And
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah, lovely work in those worlds, absolutely. And you were talking about what the books have meant to you, and every research project that's worth doing is kind of a me search at the same time. So I'm curious how you initiated that process. What was the starting point for your research?
well, I reread the whole decade, and making notes on the themes I wanted to cover, and some things just leapt up out of that reading. Like Jim Shooter telling the same story 5 times in order. And
Hmm.
he really has a concentration on a particular theme, which actually serves the book really well because that kind of becomes what the Avengers is about over that time.
Hmm.
And I do think his Michael epic is a bit of a masterpiece in terms of threading together various things, and it's a masterpiece of subplotting. Um, and uh, I The other things that leapt out were um, Roy Thomas's tropes, which are delightful and are very much of superhero comics of the time. But there's a self-awareness which I don't think many people had pointed out before. He will have a character um, explain their powers at great length out loud when there's nobody else in the room, and then say something self-deprecating at the end, which indicates he knows full well that this is not realism. You
Hmm.
know, in musicals, why is everybody singing all the time? In superhero comics of the time, heroes just talked out loud their internal monologue because they're talking to the reader, and it's a style, and one I I I lament the demise of the thought bubble. And I note that various creators like Al Ewing have discreetly brought it back in recent years, and more power to them.
Hmm.
Um, and that it's just fashion. It's just how does the audience feel is a natural way to tell a story? And in the early 70s, there were various enormous um, cultural this is just how it's done things in place about superhero comics, and
Hmm.
exploring those was great fun. And Yeah, and also Roy Thomas's genuine love for SF. The way that his knowledge of prose SF comes into the Avengers, and the Kree Skrull War is terrific. That's inventing so many things, and and of course Englehart. Englehart is my favorite, actually. I don't like to pick favorites, but I he's a wild ride. But at the end of the Mantis saga, at the end of the Celestial Madonna, he wraps up not just all his plots, but neatly all his themes with a self-knowledge that's tremendous. And if he'd stopped there and just said, I'd like another assignment, please, I'm done. I
Hmm.
think that would be even known even as even more magnificent a run than it is. And it's a pretty magnificent run as it stands. But then he starts all over again with Moondragon and the Beast and the extraordinary page where the actual vice president of the USA at that time it rants about being a supervillain. And
There's some parallelism, actually. Absolutely.
oh my goodness. Yeah, that page is I reprint the page in full because it's almost a commentary on the modern day.
Mhm,
And of course that run, that second go ends in flames. It crashes. And the who's responsible for that is something people are still arguing about, but I try and very gently pass it. Um,
mhm,
but yeah, and I'm actually I also find um, the group of writers that Roger Stern put together when David Michelini was going to take over full time, but then was called away to write the Avengers novel. And we get wonderful stuff like the Yesterday Quest
mhm,
and
mhm,
Stephen Grant, and I was privileged to talk to a few of these people. I talked to Scott Edelman, who gave me a lot of guidance through these folk. I just reached out to Stephen Grant online and met him then at San Diego and was delighted by how much he wanted to contribute. Can you imagine, by the way, showing up at Marvel and starting to work for them and discovering that your name was the alter ego of one of their characters? It's
True,
like
very
it's like
true.
it's like Bruce Wayne going to work at DC. And
There's a plot in and of itself, and very much an existential moment. It's like, have I always been here?
but
Yeah,
yeah, so it was nice to be able to get direct quotes about some of this stuff. And
yeah.
yeah, and I really like the smooth way that Roger Stern, who's immensely underrated as a writer and an editor,
Hmm.
um, the idea of the filling issue goes away because he just pulls together a group of writers and they do really good stuff while they're waiting for David Michelini to come back. And it just all feels like a oneness. So yeah, I could talk about this stuff all day. It's there's uh we deal with the sometimes jaw-dropping moments when the 1970s intrudes
Hmm.
with the Sons of the Serpent, Marvel's version of the Clan, and the letters pages, which are immensely radical and terrific, and full of people yelling, which is to Marvel's credit. They do not. If you write in a fun letter yelling at them, they'll print it. And and the way the Scarlet Witch is treated is
Hmm.
almost an
Hmm.
index. It's almost an index of where feminism is, and quite often she's slightly ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Um, Especially when she gets radicalized about normal humans, about that is normal. That is to say, non-mutants. Um,
Hmm.
um, and eh, there's her knowledge of her power and her reveling in it is never punished. She's never put back. Actually, she is put back in her box a couple of times, but it's largely because early on, nobody's quite sure of what her power is or how it works. And
Hmm.
there's a
Hmm.
couple of steadyings of the ship and definitions along the way. But by the end of the 70s, when George Perez um, is drawing her, and yeah, there's a conscious enjoyment of her taking down Ultron, for example. And
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so oh, and the course of uh, Henry Pym's
Yeah, very fascinating character. Yeah.
the gravity of it's superhero gravity. It's well, we've got a scientist who smokes a pipe and is the epitome of the upright, slightly dull science dude, and how that curdles.
Mm,
Because in superhero comics, you can't just be a little bit something. You've always got to be full on that thing. And
mhm.
so there's just a moment in American culture where we start to distrust that dude. And from that point, Henry Pym is doomed. He's heading gravitationally for awfulness. And
Yeah.
every now and then, a writer will push him back a bit, but after the extraordinary Roy Thomas events where he adopts the Yellow Jacket identity, has some kind of a breakdown, becomes even more boorish and annoying than Hawkeye is, and and marries Jan, who goes along with it, and then gets better. Um, and and he largely gets better in other people's comics.
Yeah.
And then he's kind of too when Jan goes missing under Englehart, he's too into it. He's too driven. He's too obsessive. And then people in the letters page start talking about, well, he seems a bit manic.
Mhm, mhm.
And watching this gravity happen is extraordinary. It's Yeah. So yeah, there's been all sorts of wonderful little things I found. The panel where Steve Englehart just full on takes the mickey out of what's happening in Jungle Action,
Mhm.
where he has Thor video call T'Challa to ask if he'll come back to the Avengers. And T'Challa comes out with this enormous speech balloon, which is sort of overtly purple and poetic. And Thor just thinks, nay. And
Yeah, that
that
now. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, that's one writer directly having a poke at another through the pages of a superhero comic. Sorry, do go on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was just thinking about the Hank Pym, and if only there had been a real life corollary in the 1970s to distrust of someone with a great deal of power who might have been obsessive and manic.
Yeah,
Wouldn't that be a nice connection somewhere?
I mean, Steve Englehart basically says this out loud. Another wonderful moment where Captain America arrives in the Avengers from his own book, having
Hmm.
just, it's strongly implied in Steve Englehart's Captain America, watched President Nixon, revealed as the leader of the secret empire, evil organization, take his own life in the Oval Office. And Cap arrives in the Avengers about to explain this to everyone and kind of goes, well, listen, I've just come back from, and then the Kree Skrull War intrudes, and they've got to go off and do that, and we never quite get to hear Cap's story.
Yeah, yeah, lots to fill in there. Yeah. Uh, you were talking about Scarlet Witch, sort of embodying and being a metric for feminism of the time. Any other characters that you feel like pull in the cultural zeitgeist in really particular ways?
Yeah, Moondragon and Hellcat. Um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Englehart is very clever with these two. He has Moondragon basically be his Mantis replacement. And that is to say, the letters pages think she's too powerful.
Hmm.
And Hellcat, a deliberate non-feminist, who insists that she's Miss, not Ms. And
Hmm.
and because Englehart grew up reading Marvel Romance comics, Patsy Walker, and loved them, he just basically brought Patsy Walker into the Avengers so he could have her continue to be Patsy Walker. But before that, of course, Mantis. It is this the Celestial Madonna saga is tremendous on this basis. That uh, Englehart admits that initially his idea was that Mantis would arrive in the Avengers, and disrupt the group by basically having all the men fancy her. But to his credit, and thank goodness, he discovered he really liked her. And it became more about her discovering who she really was, and the audience being asked, when are you going to accept her as an Avenger?
Mm-hmm.
When is she being here part of the group going to be okay? And actually, she's only made an official Avenger in her final issue, and it's it's confronting the audience with their own prejudices very much so. And the way the letters pages go more and more, she's too powerful, she's too arrogant, you know, in a way you still hear today about female characters. I mean, there
Mm-hmm.
was some comment about Hela in the Thor, the third Thor movie, being
Mm-hmm.
too powerful. The goddess of death is too powerful, but but no, Englehart really confronts the reader with that, and her journey from sex worker to saving the universe is just terrific. And the message of that journey, because nobody can believe that she's the Celestial Madonna. Even Kang
Mm-hmm.
thinks it's got to be Wanda, because Wanda presumably is chaste. And there's a little bit about that actually she's referred to as anyway. We are strongly given to believe that, um, but but no, it's a lovely message by the end that you know, who where you come from doesn't matter, and actually the fact that you're a Vietnamese person in a very white bread group doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter either. You can still save the universe. And yeah, I love that arc. I think the way that Englehart even does a little because right at the start of his run, he played a clever trick with the Space Phantom because he was very much in following on from Roy Thomas's footsteps, and Roy Thomas loves his clever tricks and reversals. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and and in the last couple of issues, rounding out his Celestial Madonna saga, he plays a clever trick with the Space Phantom. And it's not often in comics do you get a perfect arc, but I think Celestial Madonna is a perfect arc. And yeah, it's and you still to this day get people on nostalgia podcasts mocking what they see as Steve Englehart being in love with, or Mary suing Mantis or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, no, 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 no. This is he. You know, we all find our character that sums up in superhero comics the thing you wanted to say. In my case, it was Pete Wisdom largely. And you know, you pursue that, and you very, very few writers have gotten to complete that person's journey as much as Steve Englehart.
Yeah. No. Uh, One of the things that I frequently talk about or mention is that sometimes comics are seen as this one thing or this one series of tropes, and all of the work you've done here in documenting this time period just further illustrates there seems to be a lot going on with comics. There seem to be these cultural conversations and reflections. So it's sort of ironic that sometimes we take media and put them in their own little boxes, but they don't exist apart from the world and the rest of storytelling.
Oh, very much so. And monthly superhero comics are a very close barometer to what's happening in the world. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
they react to changes in the environment tremendously quickly. I would point out Roy Thomas's Lady Liberators issue. And actually, they're only called that on the cover. They're called the Liberators through the rest of the book, um, which is kind of somebody's thinking of it as a Halloween special. And there's a laugh about it at the end where Hawkeye and the Scarlet Witch get back to bickering. But actually, they're a really functional all-woman super team, They may have been tricked into it by the Enchantress, but Wanda got that all along and was just waiting to turn the tables. And yeah, at the end they go, we might try this again. I think it's a shame they didn't. But Hawkeye, by the way, is kind of the elephant in the room throughout the book. He spends the entire 70s leaving the team and then coming back, and he never learns anything. I mean, it's clear that we're meant to think of his behavior as just a bit old-fashioned and boorish and laddish. But actually, by modern standards, it's pretty awful. And the number of women he kisses against their will is extraordinary. And
Yeah.
yeah, and by the end, they kind of know this is a bit awful. And
Mhm.
it's I think it's interesting that with all the non-aging of superheroes, he is one of the few that's been allowed to age up a bit, and he's now seen as a
Mhm.
mentor figure. And he's a bit of an old guy,
Yeah.
and I think it's really lucky that he managed to avoid the Henry Pym gravity trap really narrowly, I think.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Um,
oh yeah. But no, it's uh, yeah, there's a whole bunch of fascinating stuff here, like the way that Wanda and the Vision um, come together largely through letters page pressure.
mm,
The and the number of women reading Avengers as represented in the letters pages is really surprising. And
yeah.
they very much want those two to get together. And but it's oh, I think it's the future Wendy Pinney. I can't remember exactly. Sends a very prescient letter and saying, "Well, now I want them to get married, but getting married is death for superheroes. So I would like them to get married and then continue to do something interesting."
Mhm, mhm. Nice commentary there.
Yeah, but no, they are a mixed marriage, and they are treated as such.
Right.
And they get hate mail in the comics. No, I don't mean from comics
Wow.
readers. I mean in the fiction of the comic is them getting
Mhm.
hate mail having gotten married. And that's really on point for where America is at that point.
Yeah. And so much we could go on and talk about how this traces into the 1980s, especially with Hawkeye and the things that happened there. But there truly is so much to dig into. And I'm just looking over your shoulder at that stack of books and just imagining the research process that you've been on.
Well,
Uh,
thank you. You can find me at paulcornell.com, where you will find details of how to sign up for my free Friday newsletter, where I talk about not just my work, but being the dad of an autistic son. And I mentioned that because it's the most popular bit, to be honest. And
mhm.
um, I'm also the co-host of Telefantasy Time Jump, a podcast where myself and Lisbeth Miles watch ancient television in year order. And yeah, I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, and that's it. And
Fantastic.
yeah.
Well,
Oh,
great to meet
and
you,
you can
Paul.
thank you, and you can find the book everywhere.
Wonderful, wonderful. Bloomsbury Academic.
Thank you very much for having me on.